Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
In the twilight years of the Second Age, when the world was yet unbroken and the stars burned bright above Middle-earth, there came to the fair land of Eregion a stranger. He walked from the east beneath a gray cloak, his voice soft as silver, and his words sweet as the song of water over stone. The elves who dwelt there, craftsmen and jewelsmiths beyond compare, welcomed him gladly, for he bore gifts of knowledge and spoke of wonders yet unmade. He called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. His eyes gleamed like polished steel, and though his smile was warm, there was a depth behind it that few could read. He came before Celebrimbor, greatest of the Gwathi Mirden, the guild of elven smiths, and bowed low in courtesy. "Great are your works, Lord of Eregion," said Anatar, his voice smooth and measured, "but greater still may they become. For the world is wide and its secrets deep. Would you not learn how to make beauty that endures even the weariness of time?" And Celebrimbor, proud and eager for craft, welcomed him. Together they spoke of gems and metals, of the shaping of things hidden beneath the earth. Day by day the forges of Austin Hill shone brighter, their chimneys rising like towers of fire against the blue sky. Yet among the smiths there was one who did not rest easy. His name was Callion, a younger elf of keen mind and quiet nature. He listened to Anatar's teachings, but felt a chill at times when the stranger's gaze turned his way. For all Anatar's beauty, there was something cold beneath his fair seeming, as though his heart beat to a rhythm older and darker than the song of the Eldar. One evening, as the red light of the forge painted the walls in gold and shadow, Callion spoke to his master. "My lord," he said softly to Celebrimbor, "this Anatar speaks wonders, yet his speech is strange. He names places I have never heard, and his knowledge is deep beyond measure. Whence came he? None know his kin nor his house." Celebrimbor smiled, his hands busy shaping silver upon the anvil. "Do not let mistrust shadow your heart, Callion. Wisdom often comes from beyond our borders. He has taught us much that even the lore of Auli did not reveal. If his road was long, perhaps he has walked in the light of powers we have not seen." But Callion bowed and said no more, for in his heart he felt a whisper, faint and uneasy, a whisper like the murmur of a dark stream beneath the roots of the world. In the days that followed, Anatar's influence grew. Under his guidance, the elves wrought rings of subtle power, lesser rings first, for healing and preservation. They rejoiced, for their craft seemed blessed, and the works of their hands shone with a new and living light. Yet not all that glitters is good. At night, when the forges slept and the moon rose pale above the Eregion hills, Callion would walk alone among the gardens. He heard then the wind whispering from the east, carrying a strange scent of ash and shadow. And sometimes, when he looked toward the distant mountains, he fancied he saw a red flicker far away, as though some hidden fire were kindled in the darkness. Then came a day when Anatar called the smiths together. "Friends of craft," he said, "you have shaped wonders, but now the greatest work awaits. A ring that can preserve all things unstained, an art that binds the beauty of Middle-earth against decay. With such power, no shadow could mar the world again." The elves murmured in delight and awe, yet Callion's heart grew heavy. He saw in Anatar's eyes a gleam that was not joy but hunger. That night, Calian dreamed. He saw the land of Mordor, though he knew it not by name, where mountains black as iron loomed, and fire roared beneath the earth. In that fire a shadow labored, hammering upon an unseen forge. He saw 9 tall figures standing in darkness, and 7 others crowned in flame. Then came a whisper that chilled his soul. All shall love me and despair. He woke trembling, the echo of the words still in his mind. At dawn he went again to Celebrimbor and told him of his dream. The Lord listened kindly but shook his head. Dreams are but phantoms of the heart, Calion. You fear what you do not understand. But Calion could not rest, for the whisper lingered, soft, persistent, like the breath of something vast and unseen moving beyond the veil of the world. So he began to watch Anatar more closely. He noted the small things others missed, the way his shadow sometimes seemed too long, or how the forge fire dimmed when he passed. Once, when Anatar worked alone, Calian entered silently and saw the stranger's face unguarded, and for a heartbeat he beheld not the fair form of an elf lord, but something vast and terrible, a countenance of flame and darkness, veiled by craft and guile. Calian fled the chamber, his heart pounding. When he looked again, Anatar was as before, smiling gently. "What troubles you, young smith?" he asked, his voice smooth as oil. Calian bowed low, hiding his fear. "Naught but the weariness of work, my lord." Anatar's smile deepened. "Good. Rest well, Calion. Great tasks lie ahead, and I shall need all who are faithful to the fire." That night Calion swore silently that he would uncover the truth, for he knew then that Anatar was no elf nor any friend of the West. A shadow had come to Eregion, and its whisper had only begun. The days that followed passed beneath a growing unease, though none could name its cause. Eregion was still fair, its gardens green, its river silver bright, but beneath that beauty a shadow moved unseen. Anatar's forge blazed day and night, and the air rang with the song of hammers. The elves sang as they worked, but their voices grew fainter, as if the very sound of their joy were being drawn away into the fire. Calion watched in silence, his heart heavy. He kept to his craft, but seldom spoke, and when others laughed at his caution, he did not answer. The whisper he had heard in dream now followed him in waking hours, faint yet relentless. He knew that the stranger they welcomed was no mere wanderer. He felt it in every glance, every word. One evening when the forge fires had dimmed and the moon stood high, Calion walked to the great hall where Anatar taught. Through the half-open doors he saw the golden light of lanterns and the gathered lords of the Gwaith'Mírdain. Upon the table before them lay 9 shining rings, each wrought with exquisite care. Anatar stood over them tall and serene. "These are but beginnings," he said. "Lesser vessels of power, yet each a step toward mastery of the craft. With them you may heal, preserve, or defend, but greater still shall be the 3 that shall come after, rings untouched by decay, to hold the very light of Aemon within their circles." The elves murmured in wonder. Calion, hidden in shadow, felt a chill that pierced him to the bone. "Untouched by decay," Anatar had said, and in his voice was not reverence, but possession. That night, Calion left Eregion in secret. He took no horse, for the roads were watched, but slipped silently into the wild under starlight. His purpose was clear, to learn who Anatar truly was. He would seek the wise, for he had heard whispers of a council in Lindon where Elrond half-elven and the great King Gil-galad held watch over the Westlands. The journey was long and perilous. Across the open plains of Eregion he traveled, through silent woods and along stony paths where the wind moaned in the hollows. At times he thought he was followed, for now and again he glimpsed a dark shape upon the ridges, swift and silent. Once he heard the cry of a great wolf, and twice he saw carrion birds wheeling above, though no carcass lay below. Still he pressed on. After many days, he came to the western marches, where the mist of the sea could sometimes be felt upon the breeze. There he found a company of Noldor riders bearing the star of Gil-galad upon their cloaks. They took him to Lindon, to the white towers beside the shore. In the great hall, under banners of blue and silver, Calion knelt before Gil-galad and Elrond. "Lords of the West," he said, "I bring tidings from Eregion, where a stranger walks in fair form. He names himself Anatar, Lord of Gifts, and he teaches the making of rings with powers beyond the skill of the Eldar. But I fear him, for I have seen the shadow behind his beauty." Elrond's keen eyes glimmered. "Anatar," he murmured. "That name is unknown to us, yet there are tales of old. The Maya of Aula who turned to darkness, Sauron the Deceiver, servant of Morgoth. Long has he hidden from the eyes of the West." Gil-galad rose from his seat. "If what you say is true, then evil has crept once more into Middle-earth. But you, Calion, must return and see what more may be learned. The elves of Eregion will not believe our words without proof. Go back quietly and watch. The shadow must be known before it can be fought." Calion bowed low, though fear stirred within him. "I will do as you command, my lord. Yet if I fall, let it be known that the darkness was warned of." When he departed Lindon, a strange wind rose from the sea, and gulls wheeled above as if crying a farewell. He turned east again, his thoughts heavy with the burden of knowledge. The journey back was longer still. Storms broke across the mountains, and the rivers swelled with rain. Once, as he crossed the barren lands of Holland, he glimpsed distant smoke on the eastern horizon, a red glow like fire smoldering beneath the world. It seemed to pulse with life, as though some vast forge had been kindled in the dark. When at last Calion came again to Eregion, the land was changed. The air itself seemed heavier. The smiths still labored, but the laughter was gone from their work. Tall towers of smoke rose day and night from the forges of Austin Edil, and the people spoke in whispers of strange dreams and restless nights. He went to Celebrimbor and bowed before him. "My lord," he said, "I have journeyed far, and what I have learned chills the heart. The one called Anatar is none other than Sauron, servant of the dark power of old." Celebrimbor stared at him long in silence. "These are grave words," he said at last, "yet they seem madness. Anatar has been nothing but a friend to us. Would Sauron teach us wisdom and beauty?" "Yes," Calion answered, "for his deceit is fair, his gifts are chains, his beauty is a veil drawn over ruin." Celebrimbor turned away troubled. "If you speak truth, then Eregion stands upon the edge of peril, but I must see proof, Calion, proof beyond rumor and fear." Calion bowed his head. "Then I shall find it." That night he went again to the forge of Anatar. The fires were dim, and only the soft hiss of metal cooling broke the silence. Upon the anvil lay a single unfinished ring, its surface dark, its shape strange and incomplete. He felt its presence like a living thing, and as he drew near, a whisper rose in his mind. "Do you think you can hide from me, child of Eregion?" The voice was cold and vast, like the echo of the deep earth. Calion stumbled back, his breath stolen. Shadows stirred along the walls, and in their depths he thought he saw a shape. Tall, crowned with flame, eyes burning as coals. Then the light flared, and Anatar stood there, calm and smiling. "You are restless, Calion," he said softly. "Why do you wander my halls at night?" Calion's voice trembled. "To see the truth, my lord." Anatar's smile deepened. "And what truth have you found?" "Only this," said Calion, finding strength within his fear, "that no gift freely given seeks to rule." Anatar's gaze hardened, and for an instant the fair mask fell away. "You are wise beyond your years," he said, his voice like a blade drawn in the dark. "But wisdom brings sorrow. Speak not of what you have seen, or you will find that even the bright eyes of the Eldar can grow dim." Calion fled before him, heart pounding, knowing that the shadow had now turned its gaze upon him. And in the far east, beyond the mountains, the fires of Mordor flared higher. The whisper of darkness had begun to stir. The morning dawned pale over Eregion, its light wan and cold, as though the very sun hesitated to rise upon that land. Calion had not slept. He wandered the silent streets of Austin Edhill, while the city still slumbered, his mind a storm of fear and doubt. Anatar's warning echoed in his ears like a tolling bell. Even the bright eyes of the Eldar can grow dim. He knew then that his life hung by a thread, yet his heart, though fearful, was steadfast. He would not flee. If Anatar was indeed Sauron, the deceiver of old, then proof must be found. Proof to convince Celebrimbor and all of Eregion before it was too late. That day he went about his work as if nothing had passed. The forge fires blazed, and the ringing of hammers filled the air. Anatar walked among the smiths, his presence commanding yet calm, offering words of praise and guidance. None could see the darkness beneath his fair form, save Calion, who watched in silence. When night came, Calion crept again into the lower halls of the forges. There were chambers below, seldom visited save by the highest of the Gwathi Myrdain, where Anatar kept his secret designs. He moved softly as a shadow, descending stair by stair, until the air grew hot and heavy and the walls glowed with reflected fire. There he found a vast chamber, lit by a single forge. The flames burned strangely white, and above them hung a chain of black iron. Upon a great stone table lay scrolls of ancient craft, and among them a plan, written in Anatar's own hand, of a ring unlike any other, a circle of domination, bound to all others, ruling their strength and bending their will. Calion's blood ran cold. The One Ring. He took one of the scrolls and turned to flee, but a shadow moved in the corner of his eye. A figure stood between him and the stair, a tall form robed in gray, face hidden. "You move in dangerous places, Calion," said a low voice, not Anatar's but another's. "Do you know whose wrath you draw upon?" Calion's hand went to the dagger at his belt. "I seek truth," he said. "If that be dangerous, then so be it." The stranger raised his hood, revealing not malice, but weariness. A mortal man, his face lined and darkened by travel. "I am Tarwin, once of Numenor," he said. "I serve Anatar, though not by choice. You are not the only one who sees the darkness beneath his guise." Calion stared at him in disbelief. "You know what he is?" Tarwin nodded. "Aye, he came to my people long ago, whispering a power in eternal life. But his heart is deceit. He seeks not to share dominion, but to claim it. I fled from him when I learned his true name, and yet his servants found me and bound me to his service." The mortal looked toward the door, his eyes fearful. "If you mean to defy him, then flee, elf of Eregion. He has already set his eye upon you." But Calion shook his head. "I will not flee. I must bring this to Celebrimbor. He must see the truth with his own eyes." Tarwin sighed. "Then take this," he said, handing Calion a small piece of black metal, cold as death. "A shard from the forge of the Dark Land. Let it serve as proof of what lies beneath his teaching." Before Calion could thank him, the man turned and vanished into the shadows. At dawn, Calion went to Celebrimbor once more. He laid before him the scroll and the dark shard. "Behold," he said, "this is his true purpose. A ring to rule the rest, to bind their power to one will." Celebrimbor stood long in silence, his face pale. "If this be true," he whispered, "then we are betrayed." He turned to Calion with eyes of fire. "We must act swiftly. The 3 rings must be made apart from his sight, untouched by his hand. Their power must be pure, for only thus can they withstand his dominion." So it was that Celebrimbor gathered his most trusted smiths, and in secret they began the forging of the 3, Neria, Nenya, and Vilya, the rings of fire, water, and air, and Calion, though weary, took his place among them. For many weeks they labored in silence, hiding their work from Anatar's gaze. The sound of their hammers was muffled, their forges dimmed to mere glows, and when at last the 3 were wrought, they shone with a light unlike any seen in Middle-earth, a light unstained, pure and living, drawn from the grace that lingered yet from the undying west. But darkness does not sleep. On the day that the rings were finished, a tremor passed through the air. The forges flickered, and a cry of metal echoed from afar. Calion felt it in his heart, a deep and dreadful stirring, as though something vast and cruel had awakened. Far to the east, beyond mountain and plain, Sauron had returned to Mordor. There he raised the foundations of Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, and in the heart of Mount Doom he began the forging of the One Ring, the master of all others. Unseen by any, Calion's very soul trembled when that fire was kindled. He felt its whisper as though it spoke beside his ear. "I am the will of the world made one. You cannot hide from me." Anatar was gone from Eregion when next the sun rose. Some said he had returned eastward to gather strength. Others said he walked unseen among them still. But Calion knew the truth. The shadow had withdrawn only to strike. In secret, Celebrimbor sent the 3 away. One to Gil-galad, one to Galadriel, and one kept hidden. "They must never fall into his hands," he told Calion, "for if he claims them, all light will fade." Calion bowed, though his heart was heavy. "Then I will guard what hope remains." But the days that followed were filled with foreboding. Messengers rode in haste from the east, bringing tales of black armies mustering in the plains of Gorgoroth. The sky itself seemed to darken, and a strange red glow flickered beyond the mountains at night. And one evening, as the bells of Austin Edhill rang in warning, Calion climbed to the high tower of the city and looked eastward. There, upon the horizon, he saw a single red flare rising like a wound upon the sky, the sign of the One Ring's awakening. Then a voice, faint yet terrible, came upon the wind. "I am returned!" The ground trembled beneath his feet, and in that moment Calion knew that the time for secrecy was ended. The war for the soul of Middle-earth had begun. The storm broke upon Eregion without warning. A black wind swept down from the east, carrying the scent of ash and iron. The forges fell silent, and the elves stood upon the walls of Austin Edel, staring into the gloom that gathered on the horizon. No birds sang. The trees bent as if in dread, and then they saw it, a shadow, moving across the plain, vast and dark as the night itself. At first it seemed a storm of dust, but within it moved ranks of soldiers, orcs of Mordor, clad in black mail and bearing the red eye upon their banners. Behind them came creatures fouler still, trolls with hides of stone and men twisted by fear and greed, their eyes glinting with madness. The servants of Sauron had come for the rings of power. Calion stood beside Celebrimbor upon the high wall, watching the approaching horde. "It is he," Calion said, his voice low. "Anatar no more. Sauron has revealed himself." Celebrimbor's face was pale, but his eyes burned with fierce resolve. "Then we shall meet him with fire and steel," he said. "Eregion will not fall without a fight." The horns of the city rang out, echoing through the valleys. Warriors gathered, their armor gleaming dimly in the gray light. The smiths laid aside their hammers for swords and bows. From the west, riders were sent to call for aid, though none knew if help would come in time. By noon, the plain before Eregion was black with Sauron's host. A great silence fell before the storm of battle, and then, from amidst the ranks of the enemy, there came a cry, a deep, commanding voice that seemed to shake the earth itself. "Deliver unto me the rings of power, and I shall spare your city." Celebrimbor's reply rang from the walls. "The gifts you gave are cursed, Lord of Lies. You shall have nothing from Eregion but your own ruin." Then the siege began. Arrows darkened the sky, and the clash of steel and the screams of the dying rose in dreadful chorus. Calion fought upon the walls, his blade red with the blood of orcs. Fire rained upon the city, and smoke filled the air. The fair halls of the Gwaith y Myrdain burned, their windows shattered, and their treasures consumed by flame. Through the chaos, Calion sought Celebrimbor, but the Lord of Eregion was nowhere to be found. Rumor spread that he had fled to the house of the Myrdain, where the remaining rings were kept. Calion gathered a small band of survivors and made for the inner courts. They fought their way through the streets, past burning homes and fallen towers. The air was thick with ash. In the distance, the gates of the city shuddered and broke, and Sauron's armies poured in a black tide. At last, Calion reached the great hall of the Myrdain. There, amid the smoke and ruin, stood Celebrimbor, alone. His sword was drawn, and in his hand he held a single ring that glowed with faint light. "Calion," he said, his voice weary yet resolute, "you must take this. It is one of the three, the Ring of Fire. Go, carry it west to safety. I will delay him as long as I may." Calion's heart broke. "My lord, come with me. We can still flee together." But Celebrimbor shook his head. "It is too late. He is coming." Even as he spoke, the great doors burst open, and the shadow entered. Sauron came not in fair form now, but revealed in his might, a figure tall as a tower, armored in black, crowned with flame. His eyes burned with terrible light, and in his hand he bore a mace that shone like molten iron. "Celebrimbor," he said, his voice like thunder, "you have defied me for the last time." Celebrimbor raised his sword, and the two clashed. The light of the elf's blade met the darkness of Sauron's power, and for a moment the hall itself seemed to tremble. Calion, struck by the force of their duel, was thrown to the ground. Through the smoke and the roaring fire he saw his lord fall. Celebrimbor struck once, twice, but Sauron's strength was too great. The Dark Lord caught him by the throat, lifting him from the ground. "Where are the three?" Sauron demanded. Celebrimbor laughed even as the life faded from him. "You shall never find them." With a roar, Sauron hurled him aside. The body of Celebrimbor fell upon the steps of the forge, broken and still. Something within Calian shattered. Rising, he seized the ring of fire from where it had fallen and fled through a hidden passage beneath the hall. Behind him, the city burned. The sound of Sauron's laughter followed him into the dark. He ran through the tunnels that wound beneath Austin Ed Hill, guided only by memory and the faint glow of the ring he bore. When at last he emerged beyond the city walls, the plain was filled with the enemy. Columns of fire rose where the forges had been. The once fair land of Eregion was now a sea of ruin. But Calian did not look back. He fled westward toward the hills of Holland, the ring clenched in his hand. He heard the tramp of pursuit behind him, the cries of orcs and the beating of cruel drums. Still he ran, though his strength waned and his heart faltered. At the foot of the mountains he found a narrow glen hidden among the stones. There he rested breathless, and for a moment all was still. He looked upon the ring, its light flickering faintly like a living flame. Then from the darkness of the pass came a voice, soft and cold. "You cannot hide Calian of Eregion." He turned. Sauron's shadow loomed in the mouth of the glen, vast and terrible even at a distance. The air grew heavy and the very earth seemed to recoil. Calian drew his sword. "If I must die," he said, "then I will die free." Sauron's laughter rolled like thunder through the hills. "You are brave, little smith, but bravery cannot save you." Calian lifted the ring of fire, its light blazing sudden and bright. "No," he said, "but it can defy you." And with that, he cast the ring into the depths of a hidden pool nearby, its light vanishing beneath the water. Then he turned to face the darkness. When Sauron reached him, there was no fear left in Calian's heart. He fought as one already beyond death, striking again and again until the shadow engulfed him. The hills echoed once with his cry, and then all was silence. But beneath the still waters, the ring of fire remained, untouched, its flame unquenched. And though Sauron scoured the land, he found it not. The whisper of darkness had triumphed that day, but a spark of light yet lingered hidden and waiting for its time. The ruin of Eregion lay smoking beneath a red sky. Once fair halls were now blackened husks, and the songs of the Gwaith y Myrdain were silenced forever. The rivers that had glimmered silver now ran dark with ash. Only the broken towers still stood, jagged as teeth against the dawn. The armies of Sauron spread through the wreckage, hunting the last of the elves who had fled into the wilds. Upon the slopes of the Hithaglir, a band of survivors moved silently westward under the cover of mist. Among them were a few smiths and warriors who had escaped the burning of the city. At their head rode Elendil, a captain of Celebrimbor's guard, weary and wounded, yet unyielding. Beside him walked Ardell, a healer, her white robes stained with smoke and blood. They carried little, some food, a few blades, and grief too heavy to name. None spoke of hope. They fled only to escape the shadow that had swallowed their home. When night came, they made camp in a sheltered hollow among the pines. There was no fire, for they feared the light might draw pursuit. The wind moaned through the trees, and the smell of burning still drifted faintly from the east. Ardell tended the wounded in silence, her hands gentle, though her eyes were hollow. When she was done, she sat apart and looked up at the stars, dim behind a veil of smoke. Elendil approached and knelt beside her. "We have lost much," he said softly. "Yet the three are safe, or so we must hope. If Calion fell barren one, his sacrifice will not be in vain." Ardell's voice trembled. "He was but one of many who fell. We built beauty that should have lasted an age, and now all lies in ruin. How could we have been so blind to his deceit?" Elendil looked eastward, where a dull red glow still burned upon the horizon. "Because his lies were woven in fair words, and our hearts hungered for wisdom. Yet even now his victory is not complete. So long as any of us endure, the fire of a region is not wholly quenched." Ardell turned to him, her eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "And what will we do now? Where can we go?" "To the north," said Elendil. "Elrond half-elven has gathered a host in the vales of the mountains. He called for us when first the siege began, though his aid came too late. There perhaps we may find refuge and vengeance." So they journeyed northward through the wild lands, skirting ravines and old forests, ever wary of the dark things that moved beneath the trees. Sauron's servants were abroad, bands of orcs and wolves, sent to hunt the scattered elves. More than once the fugitives were forced to fight. In one such skirmish, they were ambushed at dawn by a band of orcs bearing torches. The battle was swift and bitter. Elendil slew many before a spear struck his side, and Ardell dragged him to safety as arrows hissed through the mist. At last, they reached a narrow valley hidden between high cliffs, where a small encampment of elves awaited them. There stood Elrond, his face grave yet resolute. Around him were the remnants of the host he had led from Lindon, too few to save Eregion, yet enough to guard what remained of its people. When Elendil and his companion entered, Elrond came forth to meet them. "You are the last of Eregion's children," he said. "We heard tidings of its fall. The darkness moves swiftly, but we will not yield." Elendil bowed low. "We come bearing sorrow, but also a tale of valor. Celebrimbor fell defending the rings. Calion carried one into hiding before he was slain. The others are safe, scattered beyond the Dark Lord's reach." Elrond's gaze darkened. "I feared as much. Sauron's power grows with each passing hour. His armies march even now, seeking to crush all who resist. But we shall make our stand here, in this valley. It shall be a haven for those who flee the shadow." And so the refuge of Imladris was founded. High among the mountains, the elves raised shelters and walls, hidden by the cliffs and the roar of rivers. Though many hearts were broken, they took solace in the labor, for work gave meaning to grief. Yet peace did not come easily. Scouts brought word that Sauron's forces were moving north, burning as they came. The days grew darker, the nights filled with distant flame. One evening, as the sun sank red beyond the peaks, Ardell stood upon a ledge overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying with it the faint sound of drums from afar. Elendil joined her, still pale from his wound, but standing tall. "He comes," he said. "The eye turns toward us. But Elrond has sent word to Gil-galad in Lindon. The High King will answer, and the lords of Númenor may yet come to our aid." Ardell's gaze did not waver. "And if they do not, then we shall hold until the last," Elendil said simply. That night, under a moon half veiled by cloud, Elrond called his captains to council. Calion's name was spoken with reverence, and the tale of his defiance spread among the soldiers like a secret flame. They called him Calion the Steadfast, and his deed became a symbol of courage in the face of despair. Days later, the mountains shook with the approach of war. Sauron's armies poured into the northern vales, their torches a river of fire winding through the dark. The elves of Imladris took their stand upon the high slopes, bows drawn, spears ready. When the first assault came, it was like the breaking of a storm. Arrows flew in a black cloud, and the clang of steel echoed from the cliffs. Elrond himself fought at the forefront, his sword shining like starlight. Beside him fought Elendil, though his wound bled anew, and Ardhel moved among the fallen, binding wounds and whispering words of courage. 3 days the battle raged. The streams ran red, and smoke blotted out the sun. Yet for all Sauron's might, the valley did not fall. Then, on the 4th day, trumpets sounded from the west. Out of the mists rode the banners of Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor, and with him came the hosts of Númenor, led by Tar-Minastir, tall and stern, his ships drawn up along the riverbanks. The tide of battle turned. The armies of the west drove back the legions of Mordor, and for the first time since the fall of Eregion, hope returned to the hearts of the elves. Sauron himself came forth in wrath, but even his might could not withstand the union of elf and man. The land trembled beneath their clash, and the rivers ran wild with fire. In the end, Sauron's forces were broken and scattered, driven back toward the east. When the smoke cleared, the valley of Imladris stood scarred but unbroken. Elrond walked among the fallen, his heart heavy yet steadfast. "This shall be our stronghold," he said, "a refuge from the shadow, for as long as the world endures." And so it was. Though Sauron fled back to Mordor to brood in his wrath, the memory of his deceit lingered in every heart. The elves mourned their dead and sang songs for those who would never return. Among those names, spoken in reverence beneath the stars, was Calion's, the smith who had defied the Lord of Darkness and preserved a flame that would burn long after his passing. And far away, beneath the still waters, where his body had fallen, the ring of fire lay hidden, its light sleeping in silence. But deep in the earth, it pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of hope that could not die. For though the whisper of darkness had spread across the world, the fire of the free peoples yet endured, and in time that whisper would meet its answer. Years passed, and the scars of war slowly faded from the land. The valleys of Imladris grew green again, and rivers once red with blood ran clear beneath the sun. Yet the memory of Eregion's fall lingered, like smoke that would not lift. The elves spoke seldom of those days, though in quiet halls songs were still sung of Calion the Steadfast and the burning of the jewel-smith's city. Elrond ruled Imladris with wisdom and sorrow. He gathered lore and kept watch upon the movements of the Dark Lord, whose power, though broken for a time, was not destroyed. For Sauron had fled back to Mordor, there to rebuild his strength and plot anew. The elves knew that the peace they enjoyed was but a pause between storms. In the hidden chambers beneath Imladris, the ring of fire at last found its bearer. Gil-galad, wise beyond measure, entrusted it to Elrond, saying, "This ring was made in defiance of the shadow. Guard it well, for its flame will kindle hearts when all other lights fail." And Elrond accepted it with a heavy heart, feeling the faint warmth of its power, a fire that could strengthen but not destroy. Still, the world beyond the mountains grew darker. Sauron's shadow lengthened, reaching once more across the lands of men. In the east, his servants gathered strength, building fortresses and mustering armies in secret. Rumors spread of strange emissaries, men who spoke honeyed words and carried gifts of gold, yet in whose eyes burned an unholy fire. And always the whisper endured. Far to the south, in the shadow of the Ephel-Duath, a voice spoke to those who would listen, a voice soft as silk, cruel as iron. It promised dominion, glory, vengeance. And men listened as they ever had. But in Imladris, Elrond watched and waited. Often he would walk alone by the waterfalls. His thoughts turned eastward. The wind carried faint echoes from that direction, and sometimes when the world was still, he thought he heard a whisper, distant yet clear. You cannot hide forever. One evening as the sun sank beyond the mountains, a messenger arrived from the south, an elf of Lorinand, fleet and pale. He came before Elrond, weary and dust-stained. "My lord," he said, bowing low, "there are tidings from the Golden Wood. The Lady Galadriel sends warning. Shadows move once more in the lands beyond Anduin. Strange fires have been seen in the east, and beasts walk that were long thought vanished." Elrond's eyes darkened. "And what counsel does she give?" "That the wise should gather," said the messenger, "for Sauron's servants stir, and the whisper of his power grows louder." Elrond dismissed the messenger and sat long in thought. Then he called for Eristor, his counselor, and Glorfindel the Bright, reborn from the undying west. "The time of watching is ending," he said. "We must learn the truth of what stirs in the east. Send forth scouts and riders. Let none travel alone." Among those who volunteered for the task was Elendar, now long recovered from his wounds. His hair had silvered, but his spirit burned still with the fire of Eregion. "I will go," he said. "I have seen the shadow rise once, and I will see where it falls again." So Elendar set out with a small company of scouts, passing eastward through the wild lands beyond the mountains. They rode by night and hid by day, for orcs and darker things now prowled the old roads. After many days they came to the borders of the greenwood, vast and dim beneath the spreading boughs. The forest was silent save for the rustle of unseen wings and the distant creak of trees. They made camp by a stream, though none dared to sleep deeply, for there was a presence in those woods, an unease that set even elvish hearts trembling. It was on the third night that they saw the fire. Far to the south, beyond the dark trees, a red light flickered, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air itself seemed to hum with power. Elendar rose silently and climbed a rocky ridge for a clearer view. From that height he saw the plain beyond the forest, and upon it a host of men gathered, armored and chanting in strange tongues. At their center stood a figure cloaked in black, raising a staff crowned with flame. When he spoke, his voice carried even to the hills where Elendar stood. "The Lord returns," the figure cried. "The eye opens. Bow before the flame of the east." A great shout went up from the gathered host, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Elendar's heart turned cold. He descended swiftly and roused his companions. "We have seen enough," he said. "The shadow stirs anew. We must return." But the return was perilous. Even as they fled, riders in black mail pursued them, men bearing the sigil of the lidless eye. Many fell before reaching the safety of the mountains. Elendar himself was wounded by an arrow, and when at last he staggered into Imladris, he bore grim tidings indeed. Elrond heard him in silence. "The world darkens once more," he said when the tale was done. "Sauron rebuilds his strength. His whisper has become a voice, and soon that voice will become a cry heard across all lands." "Then we must prepare," said Glorfindel. "The peace of the West cannot last. And so began the long watch. Messengers were sent to Lindon, to Khazad-dûm, and to the woods of Galadriel. Quietly the wise began to gather once more, speaking in secret of the threat that loomed. But in Mordor the fires blazed brighter. The dark tower rose again, stone upon stone, forged in malice. Upon its heights, the eye opened anew, seeking ever for that which had eluded it, the three rings, and those who bore them. And in the still hours of the night, Elrond would sit by the falls of Imladris and feel the warmth of the ring of fire upon his hand. It pulsed faintly like the memory of a heartbeat long vanished, and sometimes he thought he could almost hear Calion's voice upon the wind. Guard the flame. The darkness will come again, but so too will the dawn. Then he would rise and look eastward, where the mountains met the sky. There, far beyond sight, he knew the whisper of darkness was speaking once more, gathering strength in secret. For evil never sleeps. It only waits. And though Sauron had fallen and risen before, his malice was endless, his will eternal. Yet even in the deep places of shadow, the flame of defiance still burned, small but unyielding, the same fire Calion had once carried through the ruins of Eregion, now alive in the heart of every free soul that still remembered the light. And so the world held its breath, balanced between the whisper of darkness and the promise of dawn, as the long years of watchfulness began. The years rolled on like leaves upon the river, and though the seasons turned, the shadow in the east deepened. Men grew restless, kings rose and fell, and the memory of the old wars began to fade among the younger kindreds. Yet the wise did not forget. In the hidden halls of Imladris, in the white towers of Lindon, and in the golden woods beside Anduin, they kept watch, waiting for the storm they knew would come. Elrond sat often in his library, surrounded by scrolls and relics of ages past. His hair had grown dark with time, though his eyes still shone with the light of the Eldar. He studied the old runes of Eregion, the records of Calion and Celebrimbor, searching for clues that might reveal the hidden works of Sauron. For though the Dark Lord's body had been overthrown in the war that followed the fall of Eregion, his spirit endured. The wise felt it, a murmur on the wind, a restlessness in the world's heart. One night, as Elrond pored over a fragment of parchment blackened with age, he heard a knock upon the door. It was Glorfindel, fair and bright as ever, though his face bore the weariness of centuries. "My lord," he said, bowing slightly, "a traveler has come out of the wild. He bears tidings from the south, grave tidings." Elrond rose at once and followed him to the great hall. There stood a man, tall and cloaked in gray, his face hidden beneath a hood. When he lifted it, the firelight revealed a countenance stern yet kind, lined with long toil and wisdom. "I am called Mithrandir," the stranger said, "though in the West I had another name." Elrond's gaze softened, for in the man's eyes burned a light he had seen only in the Maiar. "Then you are one of the messengers sent from Valinor," he said quietly. "At last the West remembers Middle-earth." Mithrandir inclined his head. "We have watched long from afar, but now the time has come to act. The shadow rises again in Mordor, and Sauron gathers his strength. The 9 rings are abroad in the world, borne by kings of men who have fallen under his will. His whisper moves through their minds as poison in water." Elrond's heart sank. "Then all that we feared has come to pass." "Not all," said Mithrandir, "for hope yet remains in the hearts of the free. The one ring, though forged anew, is not yet found. Without it, his dominion is incomplete. Elrond's eyes darkened. The one was lost long ago in the ruin of the River Gladden. None now know where it lies? Perhaps, said Mithrandir, but I do not think it gone forever. Evil calls to evil, and in time, the ring will seek to return to its master. So began the second great watch of the wise. Messengers rode secretly across the lands, bearing warnings to men and elves alike. In Lindon, Gil-galad strengthened the borders of his realm. In Lothlorien, Galadriel wove spells of concealment about her woods, hiding them from the eye of the enemy. And in Imladris, Elrond gathered lore and counsel, his halls filled with voices from every corner of the West. But not all was peace within those fair walls. Among the folk of Imladris there was one who bore a restless heart, a young elf named Arendor, last of Calian's line. He had heard the stories of his forefathers' valor since childhood and longed to see the world beyond the valley. Often he would stand upon the eastern cliffs and gaze toward the mountains, his heart stirred by dreams of peril and glory. Elrond, seeing this, called him one morning. Arendor, he said gently, you bear in your blood the fire of Eregion. But beware, for fire burns both bright and cruel. The world beyond these mountains is not as it was. Sauron's servants walk again, though unseen. Arendor bowed his head. Yet if we hide forever, my lord, the darkness will claim all lands but these few valleys. Should we not meet it beyond our borders, as our forefathers did? Elrond's gaze grew distant. You speak bravely and truly, but war is not for the eager heart. Still, your time may come, and sooner than I would wish. His words proved prophetic. Not many months later, tidings came of orc raids in the passes near the Misty Mountains. Travelers vanished and smoke rose from distant woods. Elrond sent forth a company to learn the cause, and Arendor rode among them. They found villages burned, fields trampled, and in the ashes strange markings, an eye drawn in black upon stone. When they returned, Arendor brought with him a single prisoner, a man from the east, gaunt and wild-eyed, who bore a ring of gold upon his finger. The ring was plain, but it glowed faintly in the torchlight. Elrond questioned him gently, but the man would not answer. His gaze was hollow, his will broken. Only once did he speak, whispering in a tongue older than any of the company knew. He is calling. We are bound. Before the night was over, the man was dead. The ring he wore turned black and crumbled to dust. Mithrandir studied the ashes and spoke gravely. One of the 9, the bond between master and servant strengthens. He gathers them to him even now. Elrond's heart grew heavy with foreboding. Then the shadow draws near once more. Soon the voice that whispers will thunder across all lands. The following years were filled with quiet dread. News came from the east of cities falling, and kings bending the knee to a hidden power. Strange clouds gathered over Mordor, red and shifting like flame. In the midst of this darkness, Elrond's resolve hardened. He called again upon the free peoples, summoning the lords of elves, dwarves, and men to council, and thus was formed the White Council, wherein Mithrandir sat with Galadriel and Elrond, and Saruman the Wise presided as head. Long they spoke of Sauron's strength, of the One Ring lost, and of what might yet be done. Some counseled patience, others open war, but none could agree, for fear warred with wisdom, and the truth lay hidden behind veils of deceit. When at last the council ended, Mithrandir lingered. Your halls are fair, Elrond, he said softly. But even here the whisper of darkness can be heard. It creeps into dreams and thoughts alike. Be wary, for the enemy's servants take many forms, and his eyes are everywhere. Elrond nodded, gazing eastward. I will remember. That night, as the moon rose over the valley, Arendor stood alone by the falls. The wind carried faint voices through the trees, soft, sibilant, almost human. For a moment he thought he heard his own name spoken. Then silence returned, but far away beyond mountains and shadow, in the land of fire, Sauron stirred upon his throne. His will reached out through the dark, seeking those who bore his mark. The whisper that had haunted Eregion and the ages since now deepened, turning to a murmur of command. The world trembled, though few yet understood why. The whisper of darkness had returned to speech, and soon it would speak in every heart that still feared the night. Winter came early to the north. The wind off the mountains was cruel, and the forests stood bare, their branches like the bones of old giants, reaching toward a gray sky. Snow lay upon the roofs of Imladris, softening the sharp edges of stone and tower, yet even that quiet beauty could not ease the weight that pressed upon the hearts of those who dwelt there. For word had come from the east that the fires of Mordor blazed anew, and that the Dark Tower had risen once more above the plain of Gorgoroth. Elrond heard the tidings in silence. So the wheel turns again, he said. The fire that was quenched in the Second Age burns once more. Mithrandir, standing beside him, nodded gravely. The eye is open, my friend, though its gaze falls not yet upon this valley. He gathers his strength, slowly, cunningly. His hand reaches first for the lands of men, for their hearts are easiest to sway. And the elves? Asked Elrond. They are beyond his mastery, said Mithrandir softly, yet not beyond his reach. Those words proved true sooner than either foresaw. In the spring of that same year, dark things began to move. In the passes of the Hitheglir, orcs crept forth by night, and travelers vanished without trace. Strange voices echoed in the caverns beneath the mountains, voices that whispered of the east and the promise of power. Among them were rumors that one of the 9 had crossed the mountains, searching for something lost long ago. Elrond sent scouts once more, and among them rode Arendor, restless as ever. He had grown in strength and wisdom since his first journey, yet his spirit burned with the same fierce fire that had kindled in Calion before him. To him, Elrond gave a token, a silver star upon a chain, and said, "Return swiftly, whatever you may find. The shadow hides many snares, and courage alone will not guard you." Arendor bowed, but his eyes shone with resolve. "If the shadow seeks what was lost, perhaps I shall find it first." He departed eastward with 5 companions. Their path wound through the snowbound heights, and though the way was perilous, they pressed on. After many days they came to a hidden vale where the river Gladden ran clear and cold among the reeds. The place was quiet, untouched by war, yet a strange unease lingered in the air. There, upon a low hill beside the water, they found ruins half buried in the earth, broken shields, shattered helms, and bones long whitened by time. The sight filled them with sorrow, for they knew that here the last army of the Second Age had passed, and here many noble hearts had fallen. As the sun set, Arendor stood upon the hill's crest, gazing into the shallows below. Something glimmered faintly beneath the surface, a flash of gold among the stones. He knelt, brushing aside the water, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. A ring lay there, simple yet beautiful, shining softly as if with its own light. He reached toward it, and the world seemed to grow still. The sound of the river faded, and a whisper filled his mind. A voice deep and smooth as oil upon fire. At last, it said, I am found. A hand seized his arm, pulling him back. Arendor, cried his companion Laren, fear in his eyes. Do not touch it. Arendor blinked, and the spell broke. The river murmured again. The wind stirred the reeds. He stared at the golden circle gleaming in the depths, its beauty terrible, and felt his heart tremble. It is the one, he whispered, the ring of Sauron. They covered it with stones and fled the place before nightfall, but even as they departed, Arendor felt the whisper follow him, a faint echo that wound through his thoughts like smoke. You cannot flee me. Their journey back was long and bitter. Orcs harried them from the shadows, and Laren was slain in an ambush near the Dimril Dale. Arendor escaped with only 2 others, his mind haunted by the voice that had spoken to him beside the river. When at last he reached Imladris, he fell to his knees before Elrond. We found it, he said hoarsely. The One Ring lies hidden still, but it is not lost. It waits. Elrond's face grew pale. You saw it? I did. Then you have felt its call. Arendor bowed his head. It calls to me even now. For a long time, Elrond said nothing. Then he rose and placed a hand upon the young elf's brow. You are strong, Arendor, yet even strength may falter before such power. Rest now. Forget what you have seen, if you can. The ring must remain hidden until the time is ripe. But forgetting was not easy. In the nights that followed, Arendor dreamed of the river of gold gleaming beneath the water, of a dark tower rising in flame. The voice came to him again, soft and insistent. You were chosen. Take it. Rule. He awoke each time trembling, his heart filled with both dread and desire. Mithrandir came to him in those days and spoke gently. The ring does not sleep, Arendor. It has a will of its own, born of the master who made it. You did well not to touch it, for had you done so, your soul would already be bound to his. Then what shall we do? Arendor asked. If it lies unguarded, will not Sauron find it? Mithrandir's eyes shone like stars behind shadow. Perhaps, or perhaps fate has chosen another to bear that burden. The ring is cunning. It hides where the eyes of power least expect to look. Trust in that and in time. The years that followed were uneasy. The whispers of the east grew louder, and tidings of war drifted once more across the lands. In Mordor the fires never dimmed, and upon the black walls of Barad-dûr the eye blazed red and unblinking. Arendor walked often by the river of Imladris, staring into the rushing waters. He still wore the silver star given him by Elrond, yet in his heart he felt the same restlessness that had driven Calion before him, a yearning to stand against the darkness no matter the cost. One evening as he stood there, Mithrandir joined him. The old wizard looked eastward, his staff gleaming faintly in the fading light. The shadow grows, he said softly, but so too does the light, if only we tend it. Arendor turned to him. Do you think the ring will ever be found? Yes, said Mithrandir. And when it is, the world will tremble once more. But whether it falls to ruin or to redemption, that lies not in our hands, but in those of a power beyond our sight. Arendor bowed his head. Then may that day find us ready. The wind rose, carrying with it the faint scent of ash from the east. The sun sank behind the mountains, and the shadows deepened across the valley. In that moment, as night fell upon Imladris, the whisper of darkness stirred again, faint but growing, carried on every wind that blew from Mordor. And far away beneath the cold waters of the Gladden fields, the One Ring slept, its golden surface gleaming faintly in the dark, waiting for the hand that would one day lift it from the mud and awaken the world's doom anew. The long years of the Third Age crept onward, slow and heavy as the turning of mountains. Empires of men rose and fell, and the elves grew weary of the world. Still, the shadows lengthened. In the east, the power of Mordor stirred, and whispers of Sauron's return spread among the free peoples like wind before a storm. In Imladris, the seasons passed in quiet labor. The waterfalls still sang, the white towers gleamed, but beneath the beauty lay vigilance. Elrond had not forgotten the words of Mithrandir, nor the dreams of Arendor. He knew that the peace of the valley was only the pause before thunder. Many who came to that hidden refuge found rest for a time. Messengers, wanderers, and the few who still sought the wisdom of the Eldar. Among them was Isildur's heir, a child when first brought there, who would grow into a man of quiet strength. He trained beneath the guidance of Elrond and Glorfindel, learning the lore of the firstborn and the long burden of his lineage. Yet Elrond's heart was troubled, for the blood of kings carried both greatness and peril. He feared that in this mortal line, as in all the race of men, the weakness of old might one day awaken again. While the child grew, the shadows deepened. Far to the south, rumors came of dark towers rising in the black lands, and of captains of men who swore fealty to a power unseen. The name of Sauron was spoken again, at first in secret, then openly with dread. One night, beneath a storm-lit sky, Mithrandir returned to Imladris. His cloak was torn, his staff scorched with black fire, and his eyes bore the weary knowledge of battle. "He has returned," the wizard said simply. "The Dark Lord walks once more in Mordor. He has declared himself openly." And the nine ride at his command. A silence fell upon the hall. Even the flames in the hearth seemed to flicker lower, as though listening. Elrond rose slowly. "Then the age of watchfulness is ended. War will come again to Middle-earth." "Aye," said Mithrandir, "but we must prepare with wisdom, not haste. The enemy's strength is great, yet his true weapon is still hidden. The One Ring is lost to him, and in that lies our only hope." Elrond's eyes darkened. Lost, yes, but for how long? For though none could say where the ring lay, Elrond knew that its fate was bound to the fate of all. He remembered the tale of Arendor and the glimmer in the waters of the Gladden, and he feared that the thing would not sleep forever. Years passed again, and the world changed. The kingdoms of men were weakened by war and pride, while the elves withdrew farther into their hidden realms. Few now remembered the days of Eregion or the forging of the rings. Yet the whisper endured, carried by wind and dream alike. In the high chamber of his house, Elrond often stood by the window, gazing eastward. Sometimes he thought he could see the faint red glow of Mordor's fires beyond the distant mountains, like a wound that never healed. He spoke seldom of what he saw, but in his heart, he knew that the storm was nearing. It was in those days that a company of dwarves came to Imladris, led by a tall stranger cloaked in shadow and ash. The dwarves were weary, their beards singed, and their armor dented. Elrond welcomed them kindly and asked their purpose. "We come from the north," their leader said, "from under the lonely mountain. Our halls have been disturbed by creatures we do not name, things of shadow and fire that speak with voices not their own. Mithrandir, who was present, turned sharply. Balrog! Nay, said the dwarf. These are lesser beings, shades, perhaps, or spirits, called from the dark. But one name they speak in their muttering, again and again, Sauron. Elrond's heart sank. His reach grows wider than we knew. The dwarves were given rest, and when they departed, Mithrandir lingered beside the fires of Imladris long into the night. He tests the edges of his strength, he said. He seeks knowledge. He seeks the ring. And if he finds it? Asked Elrond. Then all hope is lost. The wind outside rose, howling through the valley. The mountains echoed the sound like the cry of distant horns. Elrond closed his eyes. Then we must find it first. Perhaps it is not ours to find, Mithrandir replied. Perhaps it will reveal itself only when the hour of doom draws near. So the watch continued. Generations of men were born and died while Elrond's people endured, changeless yet burdened with memory. The heir of Isildur grew into manhood, strong and noble of heart, though the weight of destiny lay upon his shoulders. Elrond saw in him the reflection of those long dead, the same fire that had burned in Elendil and his sons, and the same sorrow. And still, the whispers reached them from the east. They came with traders who spoke of black riders seen upon the roads, of men vanishing in the night, of strange lights moving above the dead marshes. And sometimes when the moon was high, Elrond would hear faintly upon the wind a voice that chilled his very soul. It was soft, almost gentle, yet filled with malice, a voice older than memory. The ring is mine. It calls to me. None can hide it. He would wake then from uneasy sleep, the ring of fire warm upon his hand, its flame kindling in defiance of the dark. But each time the voice returned stronger, and he feared that the hour long foreseen was drawing near. One evening, as the leaves of autumn fell upon the valley, Elrond walked alone beside the river. The water was dark with reflected starlight, and its murmur was like the voice of ages past. He thought of Eregion, of Calion and Celebrimbor, of all who had perished to preserve the light of the west. Then he spoke aloud, though no one stood near. Your fire endures still, he said softly. Though the darkness rises, it shall not prevail. But as he turned to go, a shape moved among the trees, a tall figure cloaked in gray. It was Mithrandir once more, returned from long wandering. His face was grave, and his eyes gleamed with urgency. Elrond, he said, the time has come. The whisper has become a voice that even the simple folk hear in their dreams. I have learned that the One Ring has indeed been found. Elrond's heart froze. Found? By whom? A creature once called Smeagol, who found it in the river long ago, said Mithrandir. He has carried it for centuries, hiding in dark caves, but now it has passed from his hand to another, a halfling from the Shire. Elrond's gaze sharpened. A halfling? Then the ring's hour is truly upon us. Bring him here, Mithrandir. Bring him before the council of the wise. And thus began the final turning of the age, the last contest between light and shadow, born from all that had come before. The whisper that had haunted Calion in Eregion, that had passed through the dreams of kings and the hearts of heroes, now rose to full voice across the world. In the depths of Mordor, Sauron felt it and smiled, for he believed the ring was returning to him. But far to the west, in the hidden valley where the elves still kept watch, another fire burned. The fire of defiance, of hope, of all the darkness could not touch. And as Elrond stood once more upon the balcony of his house, looking eastward into the night, he felt the weight of all ages upon him. Yet even beneath that burden, the light of the ring of fire glimmered faintly in his hand, and in that light, the promise of resistance endured. The whisper of darkness had found its voice, but so too had the will to oppose it. The valley of Imladris slept beneath the silver veil of dawn, but peace no longer dwelt there. Word had come swiftly, Mithrandir had returned, and with him a strange company. Elrond awaited them in the great hall, his heart heavy with foreboding, for though many ages had passed since the fall of Eregion, he felt in his spirit that the long shadow of Sauron had reached its full strength at last. The doors opened, and Mithrandir entered. Beside him walked a halfling no taller than a child, his cloak travel-stained, his eyes wide and wary. He seemed an unlikely bearer of any great fate, yet in his step there was quiet courage. "This is Frodo Baggins of the Shire," said Mithrandir, bowing slightly. "He carries that which was lost, the One Ring of the enemy." A murmur swept through the gathered elves and men. Even Glorfindel, who had faced the Balrogs of old, grew pale. The air seemed to darken, and all eyes turned toward the small figure. Frodo stepped forward, his hand trembling as he drew forth the golden circle from his pocket. It gleamed softly in the half-light, perfect and innocent in form, yet from it there seemed to breathe a chill that touched every heart. Elrond's gaze was grave as he looked upon it. "So it has come to this," he said quietly. "The weapon of Sauron has returned to the world." "The ring was found by chance," said Mithrandir, "but there is no chance in such things. It has passed through many hands since it left the river, and now it comes here, where the fate of all shall be decided." Thus was called the Council of Elrond, a gathering of the free peoples, elves, dwarves, and men, with Mithrandir among them, and the small hobbit who bore the greatest burden of all. When they were seated, Elrond rose. "Long have we guarded what light remains in this world," he said, "but the time for hiding is past. The Dark Lord has risen again in Mordor, and his power spreads like fire upon the wind. If he should regain the ring, all hope will perish." Then Mithrandir spoke of the years of Sauron's growing might, of the treachery of the Nine, and of the finding of the ring in the dark, beneath the misty mountains. He told how the creature Gollum had borne it for centuries, twisted by its power until it came at last into Frodo's keeping. As he spoke, the listeners sat in silence. The very walls of the hall seemed to tremble with the weight of his words. When he was done, Elrond turned to the company. "What then shall be done with it?" The dwarf lord rose, his beard gleaming like burnished bronze. "Let it be used against him," he said. "If this ring holds such power, why not turn that power to our purpose?" But Mithrandir shook his head. "You cannot wield it. None of us can. It answers to one master alone, and he does not share power." Then the men spoke, and among them Boromir of Gondor, proud and valiant. "It is a gift," he said fiercely, "a weapon to defend the West. Why should we not claim it?" At that, a murmur rose again, but before Elrond could speak, Frodo's voice broke through the tumult, soft, uncertain, yet clear. "I will take the ring," he said, "though I do not know the way." A hush fell. All eyes turned toward the halfling, who stood small and alone in the circle of light. Mithrandir laid a hand upon his shoulder, and there was pride in his gaze. "You will not be alone," he said. "We will help you bear this burden, as long as it is yours to bear. So it was that the Fellowship of the Ring was formed, the 9 who would stand against the 9. Elves and men, dwarves and hobbits together, bound by a single purpose. When the council ended and the hall was emptied, Elrond stood long in thought. He went out into the gardens where the air was still and cool beneath the stars. There he found Mithrandir gazing eastward. "So it begins," Elrond said. "Yes," replied the wizard, "the hour foreseen by all who fought in the Second Age. The same fire that once consumed Eregion now burns anew, but it is not yet beyond hope." Elrond's gaze wandered to the mountains. "I have seen ages rise and fall, Mithrandir. Each time the shadow returns, and each time it is cast down, yet never destroyed. Do you believe this journey can end differently?" Mithrandir turned to him, his eyes bright with a strange light. "Perhaps it cannot be ended. Perhaps it can only be endured. But I have learned to trust the small hands of those whom the great overlook. The halfling's courage may yet do what all our power could not." Elrond nodded, though his heart was heavy. "Then may the valor protect him." As the Fellowship prepared to depart, Arendor, now aged in spirit, though not in form, watched from the high terraces. He had lived long enough to see the prophecy of his forefather fulfilled. The shadow that Calion once foresaw had at last taken form. Yet in his heart burned a faint hope, for he saw in the hobbit's eyes the same light that had shone in the heroes of old. The day of their departure was cold and bright. Snow glistened upon the peaks, and the sun shone weakly through the mist. Elrond blessed each of them in turn, his words quiet but strong. "To you, who go forth from Imladris, I give neither counsel nor command," he said. "Only this. Remember that even the smallest act of courage can hold back the night." The company bowed, and Frodo looked up at him, uncertain. "Do you believe we shall succeed, my lord?" Elrond smiled faintly. "That is not for me to see, but I believe the darkness fears you, little one, and that is enough." Then the Fellowship turned westward and vanished into the wild. Long after they had gone, Elrond remained upon the balcony, watching the fading trail. The wind rose through the valley, carrying with it a sound almost like a whisper, the same whisper that had haunted the ages, the voice of the Dark Lord calling across the world. Yet this time another voice rose to meet it, the quiet song of courage, the defiance of the free. It was faint, like the first note of dawn against the dying stars, but it grew as it went, weaving through the trees and rivers of Middle-earth. And Elrond, hearing it, closed his eyes. He thought of Calion and Eregion, of the ring of fire that still glowed faintly upon his hand, and of all who had fallen that the light might endure. "The whisper of darkness will not prevail," he murmured, "for even in shadow, the flame remains." Beyond the mountains, thunder rumbled faintly, as if the world itself answered. The great storm that had been gathering since the forging of the rings was breaking at last, and the fate of all lay now in the hands of a halfling and the small company who followed him into the heart of night. In that hour, as dawn's light touched the peaks, the first true hope of the Third Age was kindled, a hope born not of power, but of mercy, courage, and the quiet strength that endures when all else fails. And thus the tale that began in the forges of Eregion moved toward its destined end as the whisper of darkness prepared to meet the song of the free. Snow fell like soft ash upon the mountains of the world. The age that had begun in shadow was drawing to its destined end, though few yet perceived it. Across the lands of Middle-earth, the war kindled by the finding of the One Ring spread as fire through dry grass. From the plains of Rohan to the blackened plains of Mordor, banners rose and fell, and the free peoples fought for every breath of dawn. Far from the battlefields, the valley of Imladris endured, quiet and watchful. The waters of the Bruinen still ran clear, and the air yet held the scent of pine and river mist, but the songs sung in Elrond's halls were mournful now, filled with memory and longing. Each day messengers came bearing tidings of war, some hopeful, many grim, and always Elrond waited, looking east, where the fire of Orodruin burned unseen beyond the mountains. He thought often of the small company that had departed from his gates. Word had come of their deeds, of the fall of Gandalf in Moria, of the breaking of the fellowship, of the courage of men who rose against Sauron's hosts. Yet of Frodo the ring-bearer no tidings came. Still in the depth of his heart, Elrond knew the path the hobbit must tread, and feared for him. On many nights he stood alone upon the terrace, the ring of fire glowing faintly upon his hand. The power within it was strong, yet gentle, a warmth that kindled the heart rather than consumed it. It could not save the world from ruin, but it could keep hope alive amid despair, and that, Elrond knew, was its purpose. Then, on a morning pale with frost, a rider came swiftly down the valley, an elf of Lothlorien, his face gray with weariness. He bowed before Elrond and spoke in a voice hoarse with haste. The war burns upon the plains of Gondor. The hosts of Mordor are unnumbered, and the captains of the west stand against them at the Black Gate. Mithrandir leads them, and with him rides the heir of Isildur. Elrond's eyes kindled with sudden light. Then the line of kings endures still. Perhaps the hour of men has not yet passed. The ring-bearer has not been seen, said the messenger. Yet Mithrandir believes the end is nigh, for good or for ruin. Elrond dismissed him gently, but his heart was heavy. All that he and the wise had done, all that had been suffered since the making of the rings, would come to its final reckoning in the fires of Orodruin. The fate of the world rested now in the smallest of hands. That night a strange stillness fell upon Imladris. The stars burned bright and clear, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elrond walked alone through the gardens, the sound of water echoing softly. He felt it then, the stirring of power, vast and unseen, as if the very fabric of the world trembled. The fire upon his hand flared suddenly, bright as dawn, and he knew that the hour had come. Far away, beyond sight or reach, Frodo stood upon the brink of the fire. The One Ring, wrought in deceit and blood, had come at last to the place of its making, and though Elrond could not see it, he felt the struggle, the final battle not of swords but of will, darkness and light warring in the heart of one small creature. Then, in an instant, it was over. The wind rose, rushing through the valley, bending the trees and scattering petals from the gardens. The mountains shuddered with a sound like thunder far below the earth. The fires of the ring flared and died, and the power that had darkened the world for an age was broken. Elrond fell to his knees, his hand pressed against his heart. The ring of fire blazed one last time, and then its light dimmed to a steady glow. He wept, not for sorrow but for wonder, for in that moment he knew that the shadow of Sauron was ended forever. At dawn the birds sang again in Imladris, their voices bright and clear as spring water. The sun rose over the peaks, and its light fell warm upon the terraces where Elrond stood. The long night was over. Days later, tidings came of victory, of the destruction of the One Ring, of the fall of Barad-dûr, of the return of the king. The Dark Lord was no more, his spirit scattered like smoke on the wind. The great war was ended, and peace, fragile and new, spread once more across the lands. Yet for Elrond and his people that peace was bittersweet. The age of the elves was ending. Their power, bound to the rings they had borne, was fading. The three, though unstained by evil, were losing their virtue. The time of men had come. Elrond walked through his halls one last time, his heart filled with both grief and gratitude. He passed the forges of Eregion's craft, the chambers of song, the quiet gardens where memory lingered like perfume. Each place held echoes of those who had come before. Celebrimbor's laughter, Calion's courage, Arendor's restless heart. At the river's edge, he paused. The waters of Bruinen sparkled in the sun, and in their flow he saw reflected all that had been, the glory and ruin of ages past. He touched the ring of fire one final time, and its warmth pulsed softly like a farewell. Then came Mithrandir, robed in white, his face shining with peace. "The time has come, old friend," he said. "Our labors are ended. The sea calls." Elrond nodded. "So it ends, as all things must." They rowed together to the gray havens where the white ships awaited. There, upon the shores of the western sea, Elrond looked back once more toward the lands he had long guarded. The mountains rose like a dream behind him, veiled in gold. He thought of Frodo and the Fellowship, of all who had carried the burden of hope through darkness, and his heart was filled with quiet pride. As he stepped aboard, the wind stirred, carrying faint voices across the water, songs of victory, of sorrow, and of beginnings yet to come. Mithrandir stood beside him. "The shadow is gone," he said softly, "but its memory will linger, as it always has. Yet so too will the memory of light." Elrond smiled faintly, and in that balance lies the heart of the world. The ship's sails filled with a westward wind, and the shores of Middle-earth began to fade. Behind them lay the long struggle of ages, the forging of the rings, the fall of kings, the endurance of hope. Ahead lay peace unending and the undying light of the west. As the sea shimmered beneath the setting sun, Elrond turned his gaze eastward one last time. "Farewell, Middle-earth," he whispered. "Your story is not mine to tell any longer." The ship passed beyond the sight of mortal shores, and the world grew still. But deep beneath the earth where fire once burned, where ruin and despair had reigned, a single ember glowed faintly before fading into darkness. Thus ended the tale that began with Sauron's deceit and Calion's defiance, the long struggle between the whisper of darkness and the light of the free. And though the world moved on into the age of men, the memory of that war lived on in song and legend, carried by the rivers and the wind, a reminder that even in shadow, there is always a flame that endures. For in every age, the whisper returns, and with it, the courage to defy it.